Well, thank you for the invitation. We're delighted to be here and share with you our common interest in promoting reconciliation. Grace, do you want to begin with the land acknowledgement?
Yes, I'll begin with the land acknowledgement. We always begin land acknowledgement in our circles. So I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Innu, Anishinaabe, Dakota, as well as the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of the Métis homeland. Sonny.
So let me begin by telling you about two key foundations of our organization. First of all, we're a partnership. And we take that very seriously. It's not just another word that we throw out easily. It's a real active day-to-day partnership. And it's expressed by equal representation on our board of directors, our advisory committee, our staff, participants in our circles, co-facilitators of a circle, and even in our public presentations. And it's expressed on a daily basis when we modify a theme, for example. It's done jointly by Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So that partnership is absolutely core to what we do. And it goes back a long way. Emily, do you want to change the slide? It goes back when we think about wampum belts and in 1613, the first treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Europeans, they created this wampum belt. The image of two ships traveling side by side, each one containing respective nations, laws, and customs, but never crossing. And so we try to live by this partnership. And the guiding principles we follow are the 7 sacred teachings. Grace, do you want to share those?
Sure. So love, it is important to care for one another. Honesty, better to fail with honesty than succeed by fraud. Respect, give it, earn it, receive it. Truth, it's always easiest to speak truth. Humility, to be humble about your accomplishments is to be strong. Courage, let nothing stand in the way of doing the right thing. Wisdom, hard work and dedication makes use of one's knowledge.
We recognize there are slightly different sacred teachings across the country, but this set of teachings, the 7 sacred teachings of the Anishinaabe, were used at all the national meetings held by the TRC Commission. And so we thought these were very appropriate guidelines to live by. I mean, if you look at those beautiful teachings, if every family and every organization, every community, every country lived by these guiding principles, just think what a world we would have, eh? I mean, they're incredibly beautiful, comprehensive, sacred teachings. And so it's humbling to try to live by those. So when I say that we're an equal partnership, what we do with that partnership is what Circles is all about. We create respectful relationships. You want to change the, yes. So very early in the final report of the TRC, the commissioners.
Raymond?
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
So sorry. I am accidentally live streaming to my personal Facebook. I have to start again. I'm so glad that I caught that early. Do you guys mind? I'm so sorry.
So what do you want to do?
Oh, it's okay.
I just have to stop and restart. I am so sorry. Oh my goodness. I feel terrible.
Start again?
I feel so terrible. Okay.
Sorry,
So
Emily, what did you say?
Do you want us to start at the beginning?
Please. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. That is terrible.
It happens, not serious.
Oh gosh. Okay, here we go. Ah, I'm so glad I caught that early. Okay, I'm gonna go to gallery view. Okay, let's start this again. So sorry. Okay. Thanse and welcome to MICEC Online, a series of virtual educational presentations and discussions on themes of traditional parenting, food, medicine, crafting, language, storytelling, reconciliation, and more. The Manitoba Indigenous Cultural Education Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organization and a member of the First Nations Confederacy of Cultural Education Centres. MICEC supports Indigenous language knowledge, traditional and contemporary cultural skills, and cross-cultural awareness. We also want to acknowledge the National Indian Brotherhood for supporting MICEC Online today. So thank you to those of us who are joining, or to those of you who are joining us live. Shresenetis Negasin, Makesus Gaigan Inunuak Ostinina, Egua Netatoscan MICEC. My name is Shirsa. I'm from Fox Lake Cree Nation, and I work at MICEC as the online learning coordinator. I will be watching live comments, so if you have any questions for our speakers, please leave them in the comments and I will ask them during our question period. I'm here with some MICEC staff. We have Noah, Gabby, Danielle, Weston, and Linda's here as well. So Egusani for being here, everyone. Today's topic will be on Circles for Reconciliation. So I want to introduce you all to Raymond and Grace of Circles for Reconciliation. Circles for Reconciliation is an organization which aims to establish trusting and meaningful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples as part of the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So Tanse, Raymond, and Grace, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting us. It's a real pleasure to work together toward reconciliation. And as we do with all of our circles, Grace, would you like to begin with the land acknowledgement?
Sorry about that. Sure. We always begin our circles with the land acknowledgement. So I'll read you the, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Innu, and the Anishinaabe, Dakota, as well as the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of the Métis homeland.
So when we started our Circles for Reconciliation, the first thing that we did was create a full and equal partnership. And we don't take that lightly. It's a very serious commitment and it impacts everything we do on a day-to-day basis. Our board of directors is 6 individuals, of whom 3 are Indigenous. Our advisory committee is 12, of whom 6 are Indigenous. Our staff, our participants in circles, our co-facilitators are all equally divided between Indigenous and non-Indigenous participants, and we do our public presentations as a team. And even in our day-to-day interaction, for example, our financial matters, all our checks are co-signed by an Indigenous and non-Indigenous person. When we change a theme, it's vetted by Indigenous and non-Indigenous. So it's a living partnership. And my gracious, does that ever have an impact? Speaking as a non-Indigenous person, I can tell you that working in partnership is incredibly educational. I'm thinking of the wampum belt and how far back this whole idea of partnership goes. Emily, do you want to change the slide? In 1613, the first treaty between Indigenous people, Haudenosaunee and the Europeans, was a wampum belt of 2 vessels traveling side by side, each one containing their respective nations' laws and customs and never crossing. That's the whole image of a treaty, is it not? That we work in partnership side by side. And so we try to live that. And within that partnership, we try to live by the guiding principles of the 7 sacred teachings of the Anishinaabe. Grace,
those are the sacred. The sacred teachings from the Anishinaabe people. Love is important to care for one another. Honesty, better to fail with honesty than succeed by fraud. Respect, give it, earn it, receive it. Truth, it's always easiest to speak the truth. Humility, to be humble about your accomplishments is to be strong. Courage, let nothing stand in the way of doing the right thing. Wisdom, hard work, and dedication needs to use one's knowledge.
Those are incredibly powerful teachings. They were spoken at the beginning of each of the 6 national meetings held by the TRC as they went across the country. And that's why we use these rather than any other sacred teachings that are prominent in other Indigenous cultures across the country. And I often think about how if every family, if every organization, if every community, if every country lived by these sacred teachings, what a different world we would have, eh? And so they are something to aspire to and something to go back to on a regular basis to remind oneself of what we really stand for. So we begin our circle process with the idea of a full and equal partnership. And in this partnership, what we want to do is create respectful relationships. The TRC commissioners tell us very early in their final report that as they went across the country, they heard all kinds of definitions of reconciliation. But they said to us, reconciliation is an ongoing process of establishing and maintaining mutually respectful relationships. They repeat that over and over throughout the document. They tell us, we believe reconciliation is about respect. They tell us it's about healing the broken trust. If we have a good relationship with someone, then we have a good chance of understanding. And former National Grand Chief Perry Belgrade was speaking to business people, and he said, before you build anything, build a respectful relationship. And so that's what we're all about. And in fact, that leads us to the history of our circles and how we began our circles. when the interim report came out in June of 2015, I read it online the day it came out. It's only 27 pages. And the last paragraph starts with a sentence in bold and says, if anyone wants to do something about reconciliation, you don't have to wait till the final reports come out. And so I decided I wanted to do something. And the first thing I did was consult Indigenous people. So I spent 9 months doing nothing but going from one Indigenous organization to another, asking and listening to Indigenous people about how we could bring about reconciliation. And the last meeting was, one of the last was with the Indigenous Council of Winnipeg, chaired by Damon Johnson. Damon said to me when I talked to him about what I was thinking of, he said, I want you to come and talk to the Indigenous Council. He said, this is a slam dunk. So when I made the presentation, one of the participants, and this is a group of about 30 leaders of Indigenous organizations in Winnipeg, one of them said, the first person who made a comment, she said, why do we need an old white guy to come and save us? So I said, well, I'm certainly a white guy. I'm certainly old, but I'm not here to save you. I just think we need to be partners if we're going to move forward. And so another woman in the group, Kona Cochran, agreed. And so we began to think about forming an advisory committee. And that's where we decided right from the start, we would be a grassroots partnership and we would establish principles along those lines. And so we spent the summer and fall of 2016 recruiting and training facilitators, writing themes. We got a whole series of Indigenous scholars to write themes that would tell the history of colonization from an Indigenous perspective. And then we did a test run of a circle for 10 weeks to make sure that the model worked. And we began our circles in 2017. And so do you want to talk about the structure of each given circle, Grace?
Sure. So the structures of the circle, because we're on Zoom now, it's a little bit difficult to do the smudging, but in order to create a safe or respectful climate for sharing, it all depends if you're doing in person that you have the smudging line for people. So I read the land recognition, so that's how we start off each circle. We added in the drumming, the song, the rattle, or smudging, of course, is all optional. If you're on Zoom, you can do your own smudging in your own area, which is what I do when I do a circle. Then we read the 7 sacred teachings of the Anishinaabe. And then we added a moment of silence. And we added that just a moment of silence because there are many different beliefs by the people that come into these circles. And we want to be respectful. That's what circles is all about, is respect. So when we have that moment of silence, anyone can do their prayer in their own way to their own creator. So honoring the truth. There's a presentation of a different theme each week. Right now we have about 15 themes. So just one second, just threw me off here. So when we do the, kind of threw me off with this one. Can you go back for a second? What I was talking about? Oh yeah, so we have about, next one. Yeah, so when we do we have a presentation of different themes each week, and sharing, of course, is the longest part of the meeting. The survivors told us that Canadians must learn about the history and legacy of residential schools in ways that changes both mind and hearts. And then at the end, we have the closing vision of the reconciliation, which we will read to you at the end of this presentation. So some of the themes that we have that we start off with that we want to make sure that everybody does first 5 weeks is that getting to know you, dispelling the misconceptions, intergenerational trauma, what is reconciliation, and the meaning of land for Indigenous peoples. So we want to make sure that we have those ones, and then we go on to the other themes, which is the Indian Act, the past system, residential schools, 60 scope, the justice system, child welfare system, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And then, of course, there's a section of Métis that's added into the themes. So we have that as well. So survivors told us that Canadians must learn about the history and legacy of residential schools in ways that change both minds and hearts. And I guess, Raymond, you can talk about, so then the closing, when we talk about the closing vision of reconciliation, we have, in the circle, we always get one of the persons to read like number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and everybody says number 6. Everybody says that in the at the end of the circle.
So let's just read these, because we call it a vision of reconciliation, because this is in the final document. This is actually a single paragraph, but one of the members of our advisory committee said, why don't we break it up into 6 components? Because it really presents a vision of what the commissioners think we need to do to achieve reconciliation. So Grace and I will share these. So reconciliation must become a way of life.
It will take many years to repair damaged trust and relationships in Aboriginal communities and between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples.
Reconciliation not only requires apologies, reparations, relearning of Canada's national history and public commemoration, but also needs real social, political, and economic change.
Ongoing public education and dialogue are essential to reconciliation.
Governments, churches, educational institutions, and Canadians from all walks of life are responsible for taking action on reconciliation in concrete ways, working collaboratively with Aboriginal peoples. Reconciliation begins with each and every one of us. And so in a meeting, at the end of the meeting, individuals in the meeting take turns reading the first 5, and then everyone together says the final reading. So if you go back just a slide, just go, this sharing part, we should mention, is the longest part of the meeting. The opening takes about 5 to 10 minutes. The history that we present is about 10 to 12 minutes. And then we have about an hour of sharing. In an in-person circle, we use a talking stick, which is passed from one person to the other to make sure that everybody is listened to and everyone else is silent and listening to so everyone has a chance to share their story. So that's almost an hour of the hour-and-a-half meeting. It's the longest part. And the closing, as you could tell, is about 2 or 3 minutes. So if you want to move forward, given your particular interest of your organization, I thought it would be nice to share with you what we're doing in trying to recognize and foster Indigenous languages. And so we have a video here. I think it's about 1 minute and 40 seconds, something like that. I'm the project coordinator for Circles for Reconciliation.
Bonjour, Jimmy Thunder Nindishinakas, Madunji Sachko, Lake Ontario.
If the preservation of Indigenous language is not a high priority for governments and Indigenous communities, then what the residential schools were not able to achieve will happen by sheer systemic neglect. Those are the words of the commissioners of the TRC.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission also followed that up with call to action number 14. That reads, we call upon the federal government to enact an Aboriginal Languages Act.
When Canada was founded as a nation, there was legal recognition and efforts to promote both English and French, to recognize, preserve, and advance those languages. But we did not provide the same legal recognition to the Indigenous languages, which were already present on the land. The United Nations calls upon us to do so now.
At Circles for Reconciliation, we recognize that language is a foundation for any culture. And as such, we've recorded these greetings in multiple different languages, including 7 of the 90 remaining Indigenous languages of this land. We want to do our part for the preservation, revitalization, and strengthening of Indigenous languages.
Language.
Thank you.
So if you see at the side, there are 7 different Indigenous languages, and each one is presented by an Indigenous person, welcoming people and inviting them to our circles. And so in addition to the 7 major languages in Indigenous languages in Manitoba, there's also a greeting in English, French, and sign language. Go back to our slides. Emma, yes. And we are currently, we've asked the Indigenous languages of Manitoba to translate our poster and our brochure in 5 Indigenous languages, which we will post on our website shortly. So, and we're going to try to do as much as we can, as often as we can, to promote Indigenous languages as part of our mandate. So that's a brief structure of how a circle operates. So let me just go on and mention the where do our participants come from? Well, in fact, there's hardly a dimension of Canadian society that has not taken part in our circles. When we began, it was mainly individuals who just went on our website and registered. But as we began to grow, people who registered as individuals would then come back to their organizations and ask their organizations to host circles. And so we had a whole series of faith groups, educational institutions, corporations, government departments, museums, health and social service agencies, service clubs, youth, and New Canadians. So I don't think we're missing very many organizations or types of organizations. For example, educational institutions, we've held circles at the University of Manitoba. We have one forthcoming at Red River. We offered a circle to the staff at Argyle Alternative High School. We've had 4 circles at Montreal College. That's just one example. Corporations, we've hosted, we had a meeting with 200 business people sponsored jointly by Circles and by the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, and that led a number of organizations, corporations, to ask us to host a circle in their corporations. So Canada Life, for example, Assiniboine Credit Union, Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries, Manitoba Hydro, and several architectural firms have all hosted circles. We hosted 4 circles recently with the Museum for Human Rights. All the senior staff and program developers, including the CEO, took part in 10-week circles. So in faith groups, we have Christian groups, we have synagogues, and other non-Christian faith groups that have hosted circles as well. And we've begun to form partnerships with several First Nations. For example, just this past week, Deborah Smith, who is the chief of Broken Head First Nation and is one of our trained facilitators who's facilitated several of our circles, she's agreed to partner with Beausejour in hosting a circle where 5 of the meetings will be on Broken Head and 5 will be in Beausejour. And we're doing the same thing with Roseau River, where 5 of the meetings will be on Roseau River Anishinaabe First Nation and 5 will be in Altona. And we're also working with Rolling River up near Dauphin. So those were where all our participants come from. And just one last thing, we were on a CBC radio program at the invitation of CBC, and it generated 110,000 Facebook hits. I mean, that was the largest response they ever got from any item that they presented on their program. And so now we have people who have registered to be part of our circles in 204 communities across Canada. We did this, we set up this slide just last week, and in Manitoba, there are 43 communities with people. Well, that's already outdated. Yesterday, Emily told me that we now have 55 communities in Manitoba with people who have registered to be part of circles, and almost 1,000 people. And so we've offered circles from Quebec to Victoria, and we have about between 40 and 50 circles in preparation that will be starting as very shortly. So that gives you a pretty quick overview of what we're trying to achieve. We really like to lead the message that reconciliation begins with each and every one of us, and we call upon individuals. Just one final point, the findings of the location of these graves at Kamloops and other locations has mobilized Canadians. There's an incredible thirst for reconciliation across the country. And what that has meant for circles is we're absolutely overwhelmed by the response. Before the discovery at Kamloops of these location of these graves, which Indigenous people knew about, we were getting 1 or 2 registrations a day. Now we're getting anywhere from 4 to 16 registrations every single day. And so we're really stretched beyond our resources to try to respond to this real thirst for reconciliation. So that's what we wanted to present to you. We invite any listeners to join our circles. It's very easy. It takes you less than 5 minutes to go on our website and register. Our website is circlesforreconciliation.ca. If you'd like to join a circle. And maybe now we could see if there are any questions from any listeners.
Absolutely. I know some of our staff had a few questions as well. Noah, did you have one? Did you want to ask one now?
Sure, yeah. Well, I was just kind of wondering about if there's any stories you'd like to share, either Grace or Raymond or even Emily, and about some of the beautiful experiences that you've been a part of during some of these circles, and some of your fondest memories that come to mind right now, if you'd like to share.
Grace, do you want to start?
Actually, I do. I have done 3 circles now as a facilitator. And on my first Zoom circle, my co-facilitator, her name is Bonnie, we became friends from doing that circle. And what was really interesting on that piece was that Bonnie is a non-Indigenous woman. As you notice, we use non-Indigenous and Indigenous, and we do reference the Truth and Reconciliation by using Aboriginal. That's why we do that, just in case anyone's wondering. Anyway, so I met Bonnie through the circle, and we actually connected because I come from Manitoba and Gauze Lake Narrows First Nations, and she actually adopted a young girl whose father comes from Gauze Lake Narrows, which was really bizarre. Bonnie actually wrote a book about the little girl that she had adopted, and through Indigenous languages, she was able to have the book translated. I translated into Innu for her, and she is, I think it's almost ready to go. So from that, we built a friendship. But not only that, I met other people through Bonnie in learning about as newcomers to this country, and how much that they want to share and learn from these circles. So from that connection between her and I have to say we learned a lot from each other. Not just her learning about Indigenous people, but also that I learned from the non-Indigenous people on their views, because some people just did not know anything about Indigenous people. They said, we lived 20 minutes or 30 minutes from a reserve and never stepped foot in the reserve. And I guess why would you, if it's not in your circle and if it's not in your everyday life, why would you enter the reserve? For what purpose? So in learning that and building the relationships with Bonnie and what the future has for all of us, there are other things that we are doing together now. So we actually did a second circle, a second Zoom circle as co-facilitators, which went really well. So that's my story.
Let me add to that story about Bonnie, because Bonnie's son and his wife own a company called Golden Fried Burgers. And on Aboriginal Day, they decided to donate all their profits to Circles for Reconciliation. And so they are providing us with $1,000 as a donation to help us. That's really quite a beautiful story, isn't it? One of my own stories is we had a circle where a gentleman began to speak about all kinds of stereotypes about Indigenous people. They're all lazy, they all get everything for nothing. And he just went on about stereotypes. And he finished by saying, and I don't know any Indigenous people. And another gentleman in the group said to him, well, I'm an Indigenous person, let's go for coffee. And so they began to go for coffee on a weekly basis following that circle. And here was the education of an older Canadian who just had all these stereotypes. 97% of the participants in our circles tell us that they would recommend circles to others. That's pretty hard to beat, a statistic like that. They tell us the number of meetings is about right. They tell us how their life has been changed by taking part in circles.
Oh, miigwech, that's so beautiful to hear. I have one more question, but someone else could jump in and ask another question.
Okay, you go ahead if you have another question.
Well, I was just wondering about if you see any kind of or people who you take a lot of inspiration from, or if there's other organizations that you think are kind of doing something similar, maybe from outside of Manitoba, and or some of the people, they could just be people that have been in your lives in your past that you kind of feel like you're kind of taking a lot of inspiration from. But I just wondering if you'd like to mention any people or organizations that you really you think you're kind of it resonates with the principles of Circles for Reconciliation.
Grace, do you want to address that?
Not necessarily from an organization. That gives me a little bit of hope. I guess I could say Indigenous languages and cultural center for sure, you know, throw those in. Mama Way does a lot of work. I get a, like you're talking inspiration from a specific organization?
Yeah, or individuals. Maybe it could be people or that you find that have really inspired you to do this type of work, and or maybe you take a lot of even guidance from, if there's anyone that you guys look up to for help.
Well, I'll tell you why you're thinking of that, Grace. Let me tell you that I was terribly inspired by Theodore Fontaine, who died recently. He came and spoke to one of our circles and offered to help us in any way he could. And I met him on a number of occasions where he gave me very good advice, and I was very inspired. One of the things about his book that is quite remarkable is, you know, we've all heard about the sexual exploitation of residents at residential schools of the children. Theodore was humble enough to actually explain in his book how that happened. When he was a young boy, one of the priests would give him a shower, and he would touch his genitals. And as Theodore got older, one day he said to this priest, "You do that to me again tomorrow," he said, "and I'll beat the out of you." And that's how it stopped. What was remarkable to me is the sexual abuse that occurred is not easy to talk about. And there's a book that just came out 2 weeks ago by a couple who signed up to be participants or to be staff, childcare staff at a residential school, Alert Bay in BC. So they were hired on in the 1970s, and they worked there for 4 months. And they were appalled by the physical abuse that the kids were experiencing. they do something wrong and somebody would pull their ears, or they would strap them, or they would deprive them of food and so on. But they never saw any sexual abuse because, of course, that would occur in private. And so after 4 months of this, they decided that they couldn't change the system from within. So they wrote to government. And 2 inspectors came to visit the site. And when they complained to the inspectors, this couple was fired from the residential school. So the combination of Dan Rubenstein and his wife, gosh, her name escapes me this moment, but the combination of their book and Theodore's book helped me to understand, both the physical and the sexual abuse that went on. And if people say, "Oh, this happened years ago," that's the most pervasive, damaging comment that someone can make. This happened years ago. This intergenerational trauma is still going on. People are still suffering the effects of this. And these 2 books together are a great inspiration for me, of people who humbly explained what happened and how they were able to recover from it.
Raymond, it was Nancy and Dan Rubenstein that wrote that book.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Nancy and Dan Rubenstein, their book just came out last week. Did you want to add anything, Grace?
I can only say that I am inspired to do this work because of my family. Of course, a lot of my family members, aunts and uncles went to residential schools, and the message needs to be brought out. Everybody needs to know what happened to the Indigenous people of this country. So that's what inspires me, and everybody that actually has the same goal, like a lot of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people would like to see world peace.
If I dare add one thing, on a more personal level, I have lived with intergenerational trauma in the sense that our 2 adopted children are Indigenous. Our son is First Nations, our daughter is Métis, and our son was born with fetal alcohol. And I don't know if you know much about fetal alcohol, Noah, but through no fault of his own, he was born with a condition that affected his ability to function in society. Without question, the worst day of my life was going to court one day when he was brought in with shackles on his feet, his hands behind his back in handcuffs, and an officer on either side of him. And I thought to myself, he lives a shackled life through no fault of his own. Things that he can't do because of being born with fetal alcohol. And so as a family, we had to live through years and years of him being in and out of jail, visiting him in jail on 8 different Christmases, having to have a restraining order one time. But I'm incredibly proud of him. He hasn't had a drink in 18 years. He took an anger management course in jail. And now when he gets angry, he says, "Dad, will you handle that? Otherwise, I'll just hit the guy." And so he is a father to 2 wonderful children, a good father. The kids don't do drugs, they don't smoke, they don't drink. They're doing very well. We're so proud of them. You know, he still can't hold a full-time job because of the disability, but he's doing the best he can to live with this. So that's incredibly inspiring.
Thank you for sharing that, Aguse. I have a question for both of you, I guess. What do you find most rewarding about doing the work with Circles for Reconciliation?
Grace?
I guess I find I volunteer with a really good group of people, which is Raymond, Ingrid, Paula, Susan, and Ken. They have everyone who's involved with Circles. I guess with this group that I work with is that they have the same goal at the end of the day. And when I get feedback from the participants, once we have completed the 10-week circle, it's pretty rewarding because we still maintain that contact after that, even though the circles are finished, they still contact us and contact me and my co-facilitator. And I don't know, like I'm only happy to share what I know, and I can only do that with my family, my side. I'm Cree, of course. I'm Indian, and my culture and my language and what I experienced in my whole lifetime is all I can share with the non-Indigenous people that wanna learn, right? And I do learn a lot from the non-Indigenous people as well, because I only assumed that everybody knew. I knew that even though in the back of my mind, I knew not everybody knew about residential schools and the buried children and all that stuff. I grew up knowing that. And then when I did the interpreting for the adjudicators, when the apology first came out, the survivors told us about those. And so that was a known thing, but a lot of people didn't know that. So learning from each other, I think, is really important when it comes to doing these circles, because not everybody knows, and we can't assume everybody knew.
One of the things that inspires me is when the CBC had our project on their website, I think I mentioned I got email. Not only did they get 110,000 Facebook hits, but I got emails from people from, over 60 communities across Canada. And the message was very common. The message often was, I want to get involved in reconciliation. I don't know how. I'm afraid of making a mistake, and your project looks like a good solution for me. And that was really a message I heard over and over. And now the letters I get from participants in circles every day, we do a survey at the end of 10 weeks circle. And we ask people, what did you like about a circle and what could be improved? What didn't you like? What could be improved? Well, the overwhelming positive response about how the circle has changed their lives, and I want to do anything I can to help you. And we have over 200 volunteers across Canada who are facilitators, and they're spending 8 hours in training to be a volunteer. They're spending 10 weeks, once a week for 10 weeks, leading a circle. They're not getting paid for this. This is all volunteer time. And lots of our Indigenous and non-Indigenous volunteer facilitators are doing 2, 3, and 4 circles. They're giving of their time, not just for one circle of 10 weeks, but for a number of circles. And that's very inspiring.
Beautiful, thank you. So Linda had to go, but she asked me to say Aguse for her. This is great work that you're both doing. And she wants to know, how does one get involved in being a part of the circle or becoming a facilitator?
Well, all she has to do is go onto our website and register. And as part of the registration, she'll be asked, would you like to be a facilitator? Would you like to be an organizer? It's one of the questions. People can say yes or no. But if they say yes, then we contact them and put them in touch. So we offer about 3 or 4 training sessions for facilitators every year. Grace and I do that together. And we have coming up in August, we have a training for organizers of circles. And so it's very easy to get involved. And it's all very clear on our website. And you'll get a pretty fast answer from us. Emily keeps me up to speed.
That's great, thank you. So yeah, for our viewers watching live on Facebook, the Circles website is www.circlesforreconciliation.ca if anyone wants to learn more about circles. They also have some great resource lists on their website. I was checking it out. It's beautiful. So before I I guess I can't do that. I was going to screen share the residential school crisis line, but I will put it in the comments. That is available, as well as the support program for anybody who needs. I will be putting that in the comments as soon as we are finished. I have one last question for both of you. What are your hopes for the future? That's a big question.
Here, I'll go first. I was just thinking about it, and world peace always comes to my mind today. I don't know what the heck, I must have been dreaming about the pageant or something. But I think my hopes for the future is to have more circles at the higher level of government that could influence change in policies and practices. From that level, perhaps people going to work in Indigenous communities or organizations to do a 10-week circle first, so they could have a better understanding, bring the information to the schools, not sugarcoat it like it's happening now, and to keep it going, keep talking about it until every Canadian knows about the history. So I'm kind of hopeful that, I guess, I mean, it has to happen at the higher level for any kind of change in, I don't know, maybe I better not get into the politics. But anyway, I'm hoping that it goes into the communities and the schools. I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me just expand on that. One of the most exciting developments recently has been the government organizations becoming interested in circles. I mentioned that we had 4 circles at the Museum for Human Rights, and that involved all the senior managers and program developers. We also have just completed a circle within the Department of Indigenous and Northern Relations in the province of Manitoba, and one of the participants is working within government to see if he can't get a circle in every one of the 18 departments of the government of Manitoba. In addition to that, we have just set the dates for circles to be held with Statistics Canada. Now, these 3 organizations are organizations that are involved in policy decisions about how Canadians live their lives. These are organizations that can influence the systemic racism that's in our country. And so when Grace says she wants the higher levels of government involved, I feel we're just touching the surface of this. But if we can convince the government agencies like this to take part in the circles, and the feedback we got from the government circle was incredibly positive, then perhaps we can address this systemic racism, because until we get rid of that, we're not going to make much progress. So my hope for the future is, like Grace, that we can help senior levels of government understand that you can't do anything unless you have respectful relationships. That's what we're all about. If we had respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, we wouldn't have government going to court all the time to challenge every single development that Indigenous people bring forward. We wouldn't have all the violations of treaties. We wouldn't let communities go for 17 years having boiled water advisories. So respectful relationships between senior levels of government, that's what we need. Then we'll begin really to make progress to end systemic racism.
I wanted to read to you a few comments from our Facebook. So first we have a few miigwechas for both of you. And a comment from Anna, which says, I attended a workshop with the Winnipeg Foundation a few years ago, and they did a couple of examples of circles for reconciliation, and it was a great experience. I would definitely recommend it for anyone, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who want to work towards reconciliation. It was a very respectful group, listening to each other and learning from each other.